Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about steel columns in compression, and that means we're talking about buckling. So here I have a column, admittedly not steel, but what we're going to do is we're going to put it into compression, and note that, of course, it buckles. And it will always, unless you have bracing, buckle in that weak axis. So bending about my strong axis like this is not likely to happen, but buckling, bending around this weak axis is the most likely mode. So what we're going to talk about is the two flexural buckling modes, weak and strong axis, and we will also talk about torsional buckling, which may control depending on what kind of bracing you have. So let's dive right into that. To begin, let's summarize the limit states that we will see in compression. Now, these are specific to doubly symmetric sections. If you have a singly symmetric or asymmetric section, you can have these mixed buckling modes known as flexural torsional buckling. But for the doubly symmetric section, we could have weak axis flexural buckling, which is the most likely to happen, strong axis flexural buckling, or torsional buckling, where the section twists under a compression load at the two ends. To modify both of these, we can also have local buckling modes, where, for example, if we have a thin flange, we could have local flange buckling, or if you have a thin web, you could have local web buckling. Unlike the tension limit states, which depend on our yield stress or ultimate stress of our steel, compression limit states that deal with buckling are all going to be stiffness or stability related states, which means that they're going to depend on the elastic modulus of our steel E, which is equal to 29,000 KSI or 200 gigapascals. It will also depend on the length of the column, with a shorter column being more difficult to buckle and a longer column being easier to buckle. So LC over R is known as the slenderness ratio. LC is the effective length of our column. So that accounts for bracing and also the boundary conditions at the two ends. And R is going to be the radius of gyration about either the weak or the strong axis. When we move down to torsional buckling, things get a little bit more complicated because you're going to develop warping and shear stresses when you twist your section. The first term here is the warping term. CW specifically is the warping coefficient. That is a property of your cross-section, and it determines the warping stresses through that cross-section. And this warping coefficient is going to depend on the elastic modulus because it's through the development of normal stresses when you're twisting your section. On the other hand, our second term, J, is the torsional term. So J is going to be our torsional coefficient, and G is the shear modulus of steel, relating shear stress to shear strain, where G is equal to 11,200 KSI or 77 gigapascals. Now, you may have noticed, especially with the flexural buckling equation, because that's much more familiar, that this looks a lot like Euler buckling. And in fact, it shares exactly the same derivation. The problem is that Euler buckling only applies to an elastic section. So when we have plasticity or some kind of yielding through the cross-section, we need to be able to modify our equation to account for that. So how the AISC specification deals with this is it calculates something known as a nominal stress, Fn, and it calculates this differently whether or not you're in the elastic region, which applies to very long columns or with a high slenderness ratio, versus the inelastic region, where if you have a short column, this would apply. There is a division for LCO over R, where you divide between the elastic or inelastic equations, which are given here. Or you can compare this to the ratio Fy over Fe. That particular one is useful especially for torsional buckling because this exact same equation applies to all three of those buckling states: weak axis flexural, strong axis flexural, and torsional. Whereas torsional doesn't have an easily identifiable R to use, so Fy over Fe is a convenient substitute. This orange curve represents our Euler buckling stress, and the nominal stress is going to be slightly less than that, 0.877 times that Euler buckling stress. On the inelastic state, as we can see, the Euler buckling will just continue to increase up to infinity, in fact, as your slenderness ratio goes to 0. And that doesn't make any sense because the stress in my cross-section is not going to be allowed to exceed yielding. So how this expression works is at a slenderness ratio of 0, which would be a 0-length column, this will limit to the yield stress of our material, and then there's going to be a smooth curve connecting this yield stress out to the elastic curve once you have a long enough column. To calculate the nominal capacity Pn, we simply need to take our nominal stress Fn and multiply by the gross cross-sectional area Ag for our section. In design, we're going to use a phi factor of 0.9, and that is applied uniformly for all compression limit states. And the last thing that I'll mention is that the area Ag may get reduced if you have local buckling. So if that happens, we have to refer to section E7 in the specification. Now, this video is not going to specifically cover that case. We're only going to be dealing with what's known as compact sections. But if you do have local buckling because you have a slender element, then you need to go to E7 to modify your area. And with that, let's dive into an example to see how this works. So for this particular example, I have a W12 by 72 column. The total height of this column is going to be 20 feet, but there is a brace just below mid-height, and this brace is just a simple bar that's going through the center of my web. Now, this style of bracing is only going to be effective for the weak axis flexural buckling. So when this section buckles in its weak axis, it's going to take a shape like this, where there's zero displacement here at the location of the brace, and therefore our unbraced length is going to be the longer of these two sides, which is 11 feet. For strong axis buckling, there is no brace for this particular example, so we're going to use a unbraced length of 20 feet. And for torsional buckling, we would also use an unbraced length of 20 feet because this bar, we're going to assume, cannot restrain any twisting of our column. If we replace this rather unconventional brace with a more conventional beam style brace at that location, it's very likely that that brace would constrain weak axis flexural buckling and the torsional buckling, at which point we would use the 11-foot unbraced length for both of those failure modes. However, strong axis flexural buckling may still be effectively unbraced if I'm only framing that beam into one side of the column, in which case we could check that, perhaps conservatively, using a 20-foot unbraced length. Let's start this problem by checking the flexural buckling limit states, which means we need to calculate Euler buckling stress Fe in both the strong axis and in the weak axis. So if we start off with the strong axis here, that's traditionally called the x-axis, we're going to have pi squared multiplied by 29,000 KSI divided by my unbraced length in the strong axis. Because I have no braces effectively in that strong axis, we're going to say that we have a 20-foot unbraced length multiplied by 12 inches per foot to make sure that the units are consistent, and then divide by Rx. That is our strong axis radius of gyration, which if we look that up, that's 5.31 inches for this particular column. All that denominator is squared, and we'll find that this is 140 KSI. We can repeat this for the weak axis or y-axis, where we have pi squared times 29,000 KSI, and then divided by, now my unbraced length here is 11 feet because I do have a brace just below mid-height there. I'll convert that into inches and then divide this by the radius of gyration in the weak axis, which is 3.04 inches. Square all that, and this is equal to 152 KSI. So effectively what we can see from this example so far is that my flexural strong axis buckling is more likely to happen than my weak axis buckling on account of this brace. However, we still have one more limit state to look at, and that is going to be torsional buckling. The torsional buckling equation is going to be the evaluation of two terms, and we'll start off with the warping term here. So that's pi squared times 29,000 KSI multiplied by the warping coefficient CW, which for our section is 6540 inches to the sixth. We're going to divide this by the unbraced length for torsion squared. So in this case, because our brace is ineffective for restraining torsion, we're going to use the full 20-foot length, and we'll multiply this by 12 inches per foot to ensure that our units are consistent. Square that. And now we'll add the torsional term, which is G, which is 11,200 KSI, multiplied by our torsional constant J, which for this is 2.93 inches to the fourth. This is then going to be multiplied by 1 over Ix plus Iy, so it's your 2 moments of inertia. So strong axis is going to be 597 inches to the fourth, and my weak axis is 195 inches to the fourth. Running all those numbers, we'll see that the units are going to be just KSI, and in this case, FE is going to be 82.5 KSI. That is now our lowest effective stress, so that one controls, and flexural buckling in the X and Y axis will not control. So going forward, we're going to use FE of 82.5. When we're evaluating our capacity, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the ratio Fy divided by Fe. This is going to be necessary because I'm dealing with torsional buckling and I don't really know what the radius of gyration R is for such a limit state, but I can evaluate this limit to know whether or not I'm in elastic or inelastic buckling. Now we're dealing with A992 steel, so that has a yield of 50 KSI. We're going to divide that by 82.5 KSI, and this is equal to 0.61, which obviously is going to be less than 2.25. So being less than 2.25, that means we're over here in the inelastic region. So therefore, this will be the expression that I use for calculating my nominal stress Fn. So let's do that. Fn is 0.658 to the power of the ratio Fy over Fe. We already calculated that. That's 0.61. And then it's going to be multiplied by Fy, which is 50 KSI. And therefore, this is 38.8 KSI. Lastly, we're going to apply this to get our nominal capacity. So Fn is 38.8 KSI multiplied by the area of our column, which is 21.1 square inches. And this is therefore 819 kips. Let's apply a phi factor of 0.9 to that. And our result, phi Pn, is therefore 737 kips. So our column, with its one brace that was ineffective for torsional buckling, means we have a capacity of 737 kips. Now, as it turns out, there is a slightly easier way to do this because there are, of course, design tables in the front of your steel manual. So if you're doing that, you'll notice that there's this and many other column design tables where I could just theoretically look up my capacity for a W12 by 72 section. In this case, our unbraced length is 11 feet, and I could see that it gives me a capacity of 827 kips, which does not match what we just calculated. So what's going on with that? In this case, we'll notice that the length here is always with respect to the least radius of gyration, Ry. So essentially, this is your weak axis flexural capacity that's documented in this table. However, you can use this table to find your strong axis flexural buckling capacity and your torsional buckling capacity. So let's talk about how we do that. When we're using these tables, we need to use what's known as equivalent lengths, and we look up that equivalent length and get an associated capacity out of that. So if you're looking at, for example, weak axis flexural, you just use your unbraced length in the weak axis, and that's it. So you're just going to look that number up, and that gives you a capacity for your flexural weak axis buckling. However, if you want to know your capacity in strong axis buckling, you need to calculate an L equivalent, which is your effective length in the strong axis divided by the ratio of Rx divided by Ry. So then looking up that length will give you the correct capacity for strong axis flexural buckling. Lastly, if we want to consider torsional buckling, it looks very similar. We'll still have an equivalent length that we need to look up, which is going to be LCZ. That's your unbraced or effective length in torsion, divided by this quantity Re over Ry. Now, Re is a bit of a strange beast here because it's not a cross-sectional property. It's also going to depend on your unbraced length, and it is equal to the square root of a lot of stuff here. We got a CW plus GJ, your unbraced length in torsion squared, divided by pi squared E. We'll close our bracket there, and then you'll also, under the square root, have a 1 over Ix plus Iy. So this obviously looks very similar to the effective stress for torsional buckling, and that's essentially where this derivation comes from. So if we plug that value into here, then our design tables, by looking up L equivalent, will get you the correct torsional buckling capacity. So let's finish that off. Now, using this table, we already did the weak axis. That was LCY is equal to 11 feet. And so just looking up phi PN in that particular case, we see that it is 827 kips. Now we'll do the same thing for the x-axis or the strong axis, recognizing that we can't just look it up directly, but we need to find an equivalent length. Unbraced length is 20. So the equivalent length will be 20 feet divided by Rx, which is 5.31 inches, divided by Ry, which is 3.04 inches. So instead, I'm going to look up 11.5 feet. That is halfway between our two numbers right here for 11 feet and 12 feet. So if we do that interpolation, we'll find that phi PN is equal to 817 kips. And that lines up with what we were doing earlier in our calculations, where we saw that flexural buckling in the strong axis was actually more likely than flexural buckling in the weak axis on account of our brace. Lastly, we can do this calculation for torsional buckling, and skipping all the numbers, just plugging them into this equation, we'll find that RE is equal to 4.07 inches. So if we do that, we can get an equivalent length for torsional buckling, which is going to be 20 feet because there's no braces for torsion, divided by 4.07 inches over 3.04 inches, the weak axis radius of gyration, and we'll find that this is equal to 15 feet. Looking up 15 feet here, we see that our capacity is 735 kips, which is within rounding distance of our calculation of 737 kips from before. So the tables do in fact work. You just have to jump through a few hoops in order to be able to use them for anything other than weak axis buckling. And that's all I have to say about steel in compression for today. So as always, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.